Narrative. I had just walked through the door after a long day at work, my shoulders heavy with exhaustion. All I wanted was a hot meal, a moment of peace, and maybe some time to share with my wife. That wasn't too much to ask for, was it? But instead I was greeted by silence and the distinct aroma of something reheated, or worse, takeout again. The dining table was cluttered with shopping bags, the kind from high-end stores, all proudly displaying logos that screamed expense. The irony wasn't lost on me as I set my briefcase down. Here I was, breaking my back to provide, while she was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone, without even a glance in my direction. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my tone light despite the brewing frustration. "What's for dinner?" She didn't even bother looking up. "I ordered something. It'll be here soon." It wasn't the first time this had happened. In fact, it had become a pattern. The meals I used to come home to, her lasagna, her stews, were distant memories. The kitchen now felt like a museum, untouched and irrelevant. It wasn't just the food. The house itself seemed to be slipping into chaos. Dishes piled up in the sink, laundry left unfolded, and the floors, once gleaming, now looked like they hadn't been cleaned in weeks. I didn't want to argue. I was too tired. But as I took in the scene around me, I couldn't help but feel resentment building. I worked hard every day, taking on extra projects, enduring stress and sleepless nights, all to make sure we lived comfortably. And what did I get in return? A wife who didn't seem to care about maintaining the home or even acknowledging my effort. Later that evening, after the takeout boxes had been tossed and the silence between us had grown deafening, I decided to bring it up. "Listen, we need to talk," I started cautiously. She rolled her eyes, barely masking her irritation. "About what now?" "About this. About us. I can't keep doing this alone. I need your support." Her response hit me harder than I expected. "I didn't marry you to be your maid or your personal chef. If you want that, hire someone." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. My mind reeled. This wasn't the woman I married. The woman who used to care about us, about our home, about me. I tried to explain, to reason with her, but she wouldn't have it. She dismissed me with a wave of her hand, saying she had better things to do than argue about nonsense. It was then that I realized how distant we had grown. She wasn't just neglecting the house. She was neglecting us. It felt like I was nothing more than an ATM to her, a source of funds to sustain her lavish lifestyle. And the worst part, she didn't seem to feel the slightest bit guilty about it. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, my exhaustion gave way to anger. Something had to change. I couldn't keep coming home to this, to the lack of appreciation, the cold indifference. The relationship we once had was crumbling, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. The morning after that draining conversation, I woke up still fuming. I could feel the tension between us before I even opened my eyes. She had already gotten out of bed and was sitting in the living room, sipping her coffee like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I was gearing up for another grueling day at work. I thought about ignoring it, brushing it under the rug like I'd done so many times before. But something inside me snapped. This time I wasn't going to just let it slide. As I grabbed my coffee and sat across from her, I tried once again to bridge the widening gap. "Look," I said, keeping my tone as even as I could manage, "I don't think you understand how much this is affecting me. I come home exhausted every day, and it feels like I'm the only one pulling the weight here." She didn't even blink. Her gaze was fixed on her phone, scrolling mindlessly. When she finally looked up, her expression was one of pure annoyance. "Why are we doing this again? I told you last night, I'm not your maid. I'm not here to cater to your every whim." The sheer coldness in her tone hit me like a slap. "That's not what I'm asking for," I replied, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm asking for a partner, someone who contributes, someone who cares about this relationship as much as I do." Her laugh was bitter, almost mocking. "You think this is some kind of partnership? Let's get one thing straight. I didn't sign up to be your servant. I have my own life, my own priorities. If you don't like it, that's your problem." Her words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a passing argument. It was a declaration. She had drawn her line in the sand, making it clear that she saw no issue with how things were. She wasn't willing to change, to compromise, or even to acknowledge the sacrifices I was making. "What about us?" I asked, my voice now edged with frustration. Do you even care about what's happening to us? She sighed dramatically, like she was bored with the entire conversation. Look, I've told you before. If you want a housewife who cooks and cleans, and does everything you want, you married the wrong woman. I'm not going to change who I am just because you're feeling unappreciated. It was at that moment that I realized just how deep the divide had become. She didn't see herself as part of a team. To her, marriage was a one-sided transaction. My hard work financing her lifestyle while she lived free of responsibility. Before leaving for work, I stood by the door, watching her as she lazily flipped through TV channels. This isn't sustainable, I said, my voice low but firm. Something's got to give. Her response was as cutting as ever. Then maybe you should figure out what you really want, because I'm not changing. As I walked out the door, her words echoed in my head. For the first time, I truly began to see her for what she was. This wasn't the woman I thought I had married. This was someone who cared more about her comfort and her image than about the person standing by her side. And for the first time, I started to wonder if staying in this marriage was worth the fight. That day at work, I couldn't focus. Her words replayed in my head like a broken record. I'm not changing. The sheer finality of it stung. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Like my feelings didn't matter at all. I spent my lunch break staring at my phone, scrolling through old pictures of us when things were good, wondering how we got here. I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living like this. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. If she wasn't going to change, then I needed to. No more funding her irresponsibility. No more being taken for granted. I didn't walk in and start an argument. I simply went to the bedroom, grabbed my laptop, and logged into our joint accounts. She was so distracted by whatever reality show she was watching that she didn't even notice when I canceled her extra credit cards. I left her with one, but I set a strict spending limit. If she wanted anything beyond that, she'd have to figure it out herself. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, determined to make changes. While she slept in, as always, I began organizing my finances. I reviewed every bill, every frivolous purchase she had made over the last few months, designer handbags, overpriced meals, spa appointments. It was enough to make my blood boil. But instead of confronting her immediately, I decided to let her actions speak for themselves. It didn't take long for her to notice. That evening, she stormed into the room, holding her phone like it was on fire. Why is my card being declined? She snapped, her voice dripping with entitlement. I didn't even look up from the book I was reading. I adjusted the limits, I said calmly. If you want to spend more, you're going to need to start contributing. Her reaction was exactly what I expected. Contributing? I'm your wife, not your employee. What the hell is wrong with you? I closed my book and met her gaze, refusing to back down. And I'm your husband, not your bank. If you don't want to help with the house or the relationship, then you're going to have to start helping yourself financially. Her face turned red with fury. You're punishing me because I won't play housewife for you. That's pathetic. No, I said, my voice firm. I'm setting boundaries. You don't want to contribute to this partnership. Fine. But you don't get to live off my hard work without accountability. The next few days were tense. She sulked through sarcastic comments my way and even tried guilt-tripping me with lines like, I guess you don't love me anymore. But I stood my ground. When she tried to buy an expensive pair of shoes and the transaction was declined, she lashed out again, calling me controlling. I didn't rise to her bait. Instead, I simply repeated what I told her. If you want luxuries, you can earn them. What struck me most was how quickly the dynamic between us shifted. She started to avoid me, spending more time out of the house with her friends. I heard her on the phone complaining about me, painting herself as the victim. But I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for her approval. I was doing it for my own sanity. For the first time in years, I felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect. I had spent so long bending over backward to keep her happy. But now I realized that her happiness wasn't tied to our marriage. It was tied to what I could provide. And I was done being her safety net. Every night as I lay in bed, I felt a growing sense of clarity. This wasn't just about setting limits on her spending. It was about setting limits on what I was willing to endure. And with each passing day, I could feel myself getting closer to a decision that I never thought I'd have to make. It didn't take long for the cracks in her perfect facade to start showing. The first sign was the delivery driver. I overheard the doorbell ring in her hurried conversation, trying to explain why her payment wasn't going through. It was almost comical the way she fumbled, claiming it was a bank error. She eventually had to cancel the order, slamming the door shut with a frustration that reverberated through the house. I didn't say a word. I just sat there watching her grapple with the reality of living within limits for the first time. But it didn't end there. Over the next few days, her frustration turned into desperation. I noticed her pulling out clothes she hadn't worn in years, trying to make them work because she couldn't afford another impulsive shopping spree. Her favorite spa called, leaving a voicemail about a missed appointment, which she deleted without responding. And when her friends invited her out for their usual lavish brunches, she suddenly had excuses. Feeling under the weather or too busy at home. I knew better. She couldn't keep up with their lifestyles without my financial support, and it was starting to isolate her. One night I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, staring at her phone. Her nails, usually manicured to perfection, were chipped. Her makeup-free face looked tired, almost defeated. I poured myself a glass of water, waiting for her to speak first. "I'm doing everything I can to make this work," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you're making it impossible." I leaned against the counter, taking a sip before answering. "Making what work?" "Your lifestyle. The one I've been single-handedly funding while you refuse to lift a finger." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "You're being cruel." "Cruel?" I set the glass down, my patience thinning. "No. Cruel is expecting me to carry the weight of this marriage while you sit back and do nothing. Cruel is disrespecting the effort I put in every day just to keep a roof over our heads. Cruel is pretending you're a victim when all I've asked for is basic partnership." She flinched at my words but didn't respond. For the first time I saw something in her expression that looked like genuine doubt. Doubt in her choices, in the way she had been treating me, in herself. As the days went on, the shift in her demeanor became more apparent. She stopped complaining as much, though the silence between us grew heavier. Once I even caught her trying to clean the living room, though her efforts were half-hearted at best. But it wasn't the work itself that mattered. It was the way she moved, the hesitation in her actions, like she didn't know how to make things right. Her friends started noticing too. One of them called while she was out, and when I picked up, the voice on the other end was filled with surprise. "Is everything okay with her? She's been so distant lately." I didn't have the heart or the patience to explain. "She's fine," I said, ending the call quickly. But she wasn't fine, and we both knew it. She was starting to see that the world she had built for herself, a world of comfort and convenience funded entirely by me, was beginning to crumble. And for the first time in years, she had no one to lean on. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, eating a simple meal I'd made, she broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she said hesitantly. "Maybe I haven't been fair to you." Her words were a small crack in the wall she'd built around herself, but they came too late. I looked at her, waiting for more, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she picked at her plate, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her own admission. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence between us spoke volumes. She was starting to understand the gravity of her actions, or lack thereof, but the damage was already done, and I wasn't sure if I could ever look at her the same way again. After her small admission at dinner, things didn't change as much as I'd hoped they might. She didn't outright return to her old habits, but the effort she put into trying to make amends felt half-hearted at best. She'd tidy up here and there, make a gesture that seemed more for show than substance, and occasionally offer a comment that hinted at remorse. But it wasn't enough. Not for the years of neglect and entitlement I had endured. And frankly, my patience for her attempts was long gone. One evening, about a week later, she came to me as I sat in the living room reviewing some work emails. Her face was softer than I'd seen in months, almost vulnerable. She hesitated in the doorway, holding the edge of the frame like she needed it to steady herself. For a moment, I thought she might actually have something meaningful to say. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost trembling. I set my laptop aside and gestured for her to sit. She perched on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands like she was afraid they might betray her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she looked small, unsure of herself. "I've been thinking," she began, her eyes fixed on the carpet, "about everything you said, about how I've been treating you. And you're right. I haven't been fair to you." I stayed silent, watching her struggle to find the words. "I guess I just—" She stopped herself, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I got comfortable. Too comfortable. I took you for granted, and I didn't realize how much it was hurting you." She looked up then, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I know I've made mistakes, big ones, but I don't want to lose you. I want to fix this. I'll do better, I promise." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. For the first time in years, she sounded sincere, and maybe a part of me wanted to believe her, to give her another chance to prove herself. But the bigger part of me, the part that had endured her indifference, her entitlement, her blatant disregard for our partnership, couldn't be swayed by words alone. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees as I met her gaze. "I hear what you're saying," I began, choosing my words carefully. "And I appreciate that you're finally acknowledging the damage you've done. But this isn't something you can just fix with an apology or a promise. The trust, the respect, it's gone. And I don't think it's something we can get back." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down completely. But instead, she straightened her back, her expression shifting from sorrow to desperation. "I can change," she insisted. "I'll do whatever it takes. Please, just give me a chance." I shook my head, feeling the weight of my decisions settle over me like a heavy blanket. "You've had chances, more than I can count, and every time you chose yourself over us. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep hoping for something that isn't there." She reached out, grabbing my hand in a way that felt more like clinging than connection. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you." I pulled my hand back gently but firmly. "I needed your love when it mattered, when I came home exhausted and just wanted a partner, when I asked for help and you dismissed me. Love isn't enough anymore, not after everything." Her tears finally fell, streaming silently down her cheeks. I didn't feel satisfaction or vindication, just a deep, weary sadness. This wasn't how I wanted things to end, but it was the only way forward. She stayed there for a while, crying softly while I sat in silence. Eventually, she got up and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The woman I had once adored, the woman I had built a life with, was now a stranger, and no amount of promises or tears could change that. After that night, the house fell into a silence that felt more oppressive than peaceful. She kept her distance, retreating to the guest room and leaving me to my own thoughts. There were no more attempts to plead, no more empty promises or declarations of change. It was as if she had finally accepted what I'd been trying to tell her for weeks, that the bridge between us was burned, and there was no rebuilding it. I woke up early on a Saturday morning, the weight of my decision heavy, but resolute. It was time to end this chapter of my life. As I walked through the quiet house, I could see the remnants of the life we'd once tried to build together. The framed wedding photo on the mantel, the decor she had picked out, the expensive furniture we never really used. It all felt hollow now, symbols of a partnership that had long since died. I grabbed a roll of garbage bags and started packing her things. Her clothes, her designer handbags, the shoes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. I stuffed them all into black bags, one by one. Each item I packed felt like shedding a layer of weight I'd been carrying for years. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. By the time she woke up, I had almost finished. She walked into the living room, rubbing her eyes, and froze when she saw the bags lined up by the door. Her expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to anger. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "This is me moving on," I said calmly. "I've been carrying this relationship alone for too long, and I'm done. You need to leave." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she crossed her arms, her voice dropping into a defensive sneer. "You can't just throw me out. Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my concern anymore," I replied. "You've made it clear that you don't need me, remember? So prove it. Go build the life you think you deserve, but do it on your own." She looked at me like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe for the first time in years, I was finally standing up for myself in a way she hadn't expected. Her confidence faltered, and she tried one last time. "I can change," she said, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "We can fix this." I shook my head. "You had the chance to change, to fix things when it mattered. I'm not angry anymore. But I can't keep living like this. I deserve better." Her silence spoke volumes. She turned and walked away, and I heard her footsteps retreating back to the guest room. I didn't follow. Instead, I finished packing the last of her things and set them by the door. Later that afternoon, she called a friend to pick her up. She didn't say goodbye when she left, just grabbed the bags and disappeared out the door. I watched from the window as the car pulled away, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. The house was quiet, but this time, the silence felt different, liberating, even. Over the next few weeks, I started to reclaim my life. I rearranged the furniture, took down the wedding photos, and donated things we had bought together that I no longer needed. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine, a space where I could breathe and start over. Friends began reaching out, asking how I was doing. I told them the truth. I was better than I'd been in years. I started reconnecting with people, going out more, and rediscovering the things I loved. Slowly but surely, I felt like myself again. One evening, as I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. The weight I'd been carrying for so long, the frustration, the resentment, the exhaustion, it was gone. In its place was a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what the future might hold.